So then, on this Harvest Thanksgiving Sunday, when we are reminded of the abundance of the harvest and the generosity of God, the theme I want to share with you tonight is generosity. And that the appropriate response to the love and the provision that we have experienced from God's hand is to be a people who are generous in every area of our living. Paul in Romans chapter 13 reminds us of this, verse 8, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another." It's a continuing debt of love that we shall never repay, because constantly we receive more and more of God's love than we will ever actually give out. And so we will never be able to balance it. We will never be able to balance the books, so to speak. We will never be able to repay that tremendous debt of love to God for all that He has given us. Now, there are 5 points to my sermon. I can see the glazed look coming over your face already at the thought of 5 points to a sermon. Will this induce sleep in you, I wonder? I should be looking very carefully. The story is told of the Reverend Dr. Robert South, chaplain to the Royal Court of King James II. While he was preaching one day in 1689, he looked up from his notes to observe that his entire congregation were asleep, including the king. Mortified by this discovery, he interrupted his sermon to call out, "Lord Lauderdale, rouse yourself. You snore so loudly you'll wake the king." Well, we'll see what happens tonight. I'll be watching closely, and if I raise my voice, it'll be because I've spotted somebody that's closing their eyes in something other than contemplation. So this passage from 2 Corinthians, it's a passage that gives us, well, a number of reasons, really, but I want to share with you from this passage 5 reasons to give and live generously. Now, the background of this particular passage is the collection that is being made for the impoverished Christians in the church at Jerusalem. That was kind of the mother church of the Christian faith. They were few, probably because of the dispersion of Christians over the known world at the time through the persecution that they'd experienced. And those who were left were poor. But Paul has rallied support from them for all around the regions and to encourage them to give practical and financial support to the church in Jerusalem. Now, the Corinthian church, it seems, had said they would respond, but for some reason they'd either reneged on the promise or were slow to put it into practice. So these 2 chapters in Paul's letter, in chapters 8 and 9, there's much about generosity and giving. So today, as we celebrate the generosity of God, 5 reasons to be generous. I haven't started yet, so this is the first point coming up now. And first of all, generosity is an act of faith, an act of faith. You see, being generous suggests that you are trusting God for His provision for your needs. Even if you don't have much, it says you are trusting God for what you do need. Rather like the account of the widow's mite in the Gospels. Here we have a poor woman. She had very, very little, but she gave much. Possibly because she trusted that God would provide for her needs with what little she had over after being so generous by putting her 2 coins in the offering. She trusted God, so she gave much. Verse 8 of our reading, we read this, "And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." Now, I guess there's a key point here in the having all you need. And there's a big difference, isn't there, between what we actually need and what we think we need or think we want or what we might desire in our bank account. Trusting God for what we need means that we can be generous with what we have left over and above that generous act. Trusting God for his provision, whether we have little or much, means we can be generous in a small way or generous in a large way, according to our means. And, of course, as we're reminded in those words, to give cheerfully, with a good heart. So to be generous is an act of faith and trust that God will provide for our needs after we have been generous. And the second thing is, being generous is the best investment. Let's think about that. So in verse 6, Paul writes, "Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously." Now, with regard to harvest time and harvest thanksgivings, many a sermon will be preached on the sower sowing the seed. Of course, the farmer knows that the seed he will reap far more than what he sows, but he also knows that he must sow enough to get a good return. The Message Bible translates verse 6 in this way: "Remember, a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. A lavish planter gets a lavish crop." To be generous, to give generously, is to plant a seed. What you give to the Lord, he multiplies, blesses, and uses. Now, we're not just talking about money here, I don't think. It might be about being generous with your time, in the way perhaps that you volunteer here in church, in the church life, perhaps to work with the young people, or leading a home group, or even serving food, as it was so wonderfully served today, I have to add. Or it might be a call to lead worship and giving your time to do that. Being generous with your time is investing in God's work and the ministry of the church, and in what God is doing here in this place and through this place. It's an investment in God's work to give generously of your time. Yes, your money, but your time also. It might be volunteering in the community. Many an opportunity. I'm sure there's many opportunities in this town to work as in some way in a voluntary capacity, or perhaps as a counsellor, or volunteering for some organization, maybe the food bank, or working in a charity shop. It might be as simple as befriending someone who is lonely, or supporting a person who's going through a rough patch in their lives. But to give time is like sowing a seed. And each moment you give, perhaps just a quick phone call to inquire how someone is, or perhaps time given to sit with that person who's lonely, it's like a seed being sown, a seed that God can use and bring to a harvest in others' lives. And so you are contributing to and investing in what God is doing in the world and in your community. Of course, we don't want to forget money. Money, it might be money that is called for to be given generously for the work of God. And all that you give to the church is an investment also in what God is doing, allowing effective ministry to take place. Give in a stingy way, as the Message Bible puts it, give in a stingy way, and the church is hindered from doing all that it's called to do. Give generously of your time and money, and the church thrives. Give generously to others, and lives are blessed. In each case, whether it's in the church and giving money, or giving your time and care and attention to others in each case, it will be a good return on your investment. Because God takes that seed of generosity that you have sown and multiplies it and uses it to bring glory to him, but that others' lives will be blessed. Generosity is an act of faith. Generosity is the best investment in this world, the best investment in what God is doing in the world outside of the church walls and inside and through the church. Thirdly, being generous enriches you. In verse 11, Paul says, you will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. So we've said generosity isn't just about money, though it includes it. Generosity does mean giving yourselves to be alongside others. But also, how about being generous in your attitude toward others? How easy it is, isn't it, to be critical of and condemn someone sometimes for just being different than us. Or to think negatively of a person who lives outside of what we call the norm. But think about Jesus. Jesus met many people who behaved differently, were different, they lived sinfully, or they just didn't get what Jesus was about. Did he demand that they change before he would love them? How about the woman caught in adultery, brought by judgmental Pharisees to Jesus? Jesus didn't condemn her there and then outright. He showed her grace and love first, then challenged her about her sinfulness. Grace, love, and mercy came first. The generosity of Jesus. Then there's someone like Zacchaeus. Did Jesus demand that he repay those he'd robbed as a condition of loving and accepting him? No. It was the love Jesus freely, unconditionally, and generously gave that changed their hearts and lives and transformed their character. And I would suggest to you that if we want to live a life more like Jesus, we must be open to be changed in our attitude and character by the power of his Spirit as we open our lives to him. Until we too live generous lives with gracious and generous attitudes and generous actions toward others. Not only will this bless others, but it will mean that our lives are enriched to live with such generous attitudes. And also, generosity is a way of life that is a sign of your right relationship with God. Verse 10, Paul says, and he, God, will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness, or of your right relationship with God. Giving of yourself will result in others being blessed, and we pray coming to know God's love. Generosity is an act of faith. Generosity is the best investment in what God is doing, and generosity enriches others and you, your character. Now, is anyone asleep yet? I haven't noticed, so you've either been holding yourself rigid so that you don't sleep, or you're doing very well. Okay, either way, that's good. Well, I've always had quite a generous, talking of generosity, I've always had quite a generous attitude to those who fall asleep through the sermon. I had a farmer in one of my churches once who invariably, having arrived late, would then fall asleep during the sermon, in spite of his wife's constant nudges. And I see you're well practiced in that. So in spite of his wife's constant nudges, he was soon asleep again. I used to tease him quite unmercifully about it. But he once said to me, well, consider this. If I need sleep more than I need your sermon, that's God's gift to me. Well, I've never really ever worked out the full theology of that one, but never mind, that's what was said. So I didn't have too much heart to tease him about it even after that. Okay, so on to our fourth point. Generosity meets people's needs and inspires others. Now, in Shrewsbury, where I live, I volunteer with the local food bank. It's an independent food bank run by a church. Clients come every week with very real needs. They come into the building and are greeted by people who welcome them and chat to them, give them a drink, which in itself helps them to feel they're not so alone and on the edge of things. And they go away with a parcel of food for 4 to 5 days. But you know, I am constantly humbled by the very real gratitude that they express. Many leaving in tears of gratitude, I have to say. People are blessed and needs are met through the generous giving of all those who contribute to Food Bank. May I encourage you to continue giving to the Food Bank here because it meets such needs. So generosity meets needs. But also in the team of volunteers I work with there are those who were once themselves clients of the Food Bank, who, because they received a generous welcome, received love and care, and experienced a generosity of attitude as well as receiving the parcel of food, they started to attend church themselves, where they found further generous love and a welcome. And they were inspired and have come to faith because of the generosity they met with when they went into the church and because of what they received. Generosity of spirit in welcome, in acceptance, and in the provision of practical support meets needs and inspires others, inspires them even to faith. And Paul reminds us that through generosity, needs are met and thanks is given to God. Verse 12, this service that you perform, he says, is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Generosity meets needs and inspires others to look to God and give praise and thanks to God. So having shared 4 reasons for generous living, there is one final point, and you'll be glad to know I've got to the final point. And it's a point that without which none of the other points really make absolute sense. And it is this point. We find it in the last sentence of this chapter. And Paul says this, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. Generosity, if for no other reason, is the appropriate and right response to God's amazing grace. Being generous in every aspect of our lives is a response to the gracious and generous love that God has lavished on us. Yes, in the gifts that we have to celebrate today and all the things that we enjoy, but it's a grace, a love, and a mercy that we did not deserve. When we were sinners and far from him, he sent his son Jesus into the world. We did not deserve it, but Jesus' generous heart, coming, giving up the glory and riches of heaven, made himself nothing. He gave himself freely as he died on the cross, bringing us forgiveness for our sin and opening up the way for our eternal salvation. An amazing and, quite honestly, indescribable gift to those who were lost. A gift we should not take for granted, and one that should inspire us to live a life of love, even a life of sacrifice for God and for those for whom he died. I take you back to that verse from Romans 13. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt of love to one another. We shall never repay the debt that we really owe for the love, grace, and mercy of God that we have known. So it's there for us to live generously 5 reasons then to be generous. Generosity is an act of faith and trust in God. Generosity is the best investment in what God is doing here in church and in the world. Generosity enriches you as you change, your life is changed and reflects the generosity of Jesus. Generosity meets needs and inspires others to faith and hope. Generosity is the only appropriate response to the indescribable grace and mercy of God. May we be a people that live generously, practically, and in the way we live, by the grace of God and for his glory. Amen.